Uh, Hello, everyone. I'm here talking with Ryan Canart. The title of his talk is Water Managing a Fundamental Resource. Um, I'll give you a little bit of a background on Ryan. We've got this presentation before lunch, and then we've got kind of a follow-up this afternoon and a panel discussion after. So we've got a little bit of time after Ryan's presentation for questions if you have any. And if we run short on time and you throw them in the chat box, I'll scratch them down and we can talk about them during the panel discussion as well. So Ryan, I won't make you tight for time because I think we got some time later on. Ryan got a degree in natural resource management at Thompson River University in 2002. He started working his land in 2000 when his family purchased their property near Hargrave, Manitoba. Ryan's got a passion for regenerative land management. I've worked with him a number of times with his role through the conservation district. He's been quite diligent in his work in agroforestry, doing some adaptive multi-paddock grazing on his own farm, planting trees, growing food, and taking advantage of a lot of what rural living can provide. As I said, he's worked with the watershed since 2003. He's currently the general manager of the Assiniboine West Watershed, which is kind of an area northwest of Brandon, predominantly. He can tell you more about that or correct me where I'm wrong. He's worked with MRAC, the Manitoba Rural Adaptation Council, the Prairie Improvement Network, and Assiniboine River Basin Initiative through the years. So thanks very much, Ryan, for joining us. And I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Scott. I'll just throw up my presentation here too. Okay, yeah, thanks, Scott. Thanks to Laura and Catherine and Karen as well for giving me the opportunity to speak to you all today. I've put the name on this presentation, Designing a Resilient Farm Managing Water, our fundamental resource, but I think we all know that you can't really talk about water management without soil management, so I'll intertwine those two as I speak to this. So the picture you're looking at there on the front of your screen is was our farm on June 29th, 2014. And I think probably a lot of you guys will remember 2014. It was a summer-induced rainfall event that caused a whole bunch of flooding in southwestern Manitoba and southeastern Saskatchewan. In my municipality alone, it took out over 70 road crossings, and it did a lot of devastating impacts to the ecological systems that we use and manage in our agricultural practices. But I could also show you this picture, which was east of Forest in the summer of 2020, or this picture here, which was north of Rapid City from the same rain event. And what I'm trying to drive at here is the climatic impacts of these kind of more extreme weather events have come at the same time as we've probably bottomed out on our landscape's ability to withstand and be resilient to the impacts of these events. So, you know, our grandparents, my grandfather started to break land, 100 years ago, did summer fallow, and then the introduction of synthetic crop inputs 70 years ago, and all that kind of stuff has led to what I believe is a watershed or a landscape that's much less resilient in its ability to handle extreme events like this. And at the same time, these events are becoming more frequent and extreme, it seems. So I'm going to argue that we need to repair and work to kind of correct that issue, work to build more resilience into our landscapes. And I'll go through a whole bunch of different opportunities and projects and programs that we can offer through the Watershed District, but other NGOs that I work with offer as well. So I'll just kind of fly into all that. I guess before that, I want to give you a bit more of my own perspective. I've got a picture of the Watershed District that Scott had mentioned. This is the new Assiniboine West Watershed District. It was an amalgamation of 3 conservation districts started in 2020. And you can see our offices there located in Inglis, Minneota, and Oak River. It's a big watershed district now, the biggest in the province. There's over 20 municipal partners. I began this work in 2003. It's been a passion of mine. I've really loved the opportunity to work in this field for, you know, just about 20 years now. But before that, when I was in university, my awareness of water management and my fear of what I could do on my own farm to prevent, you know, drought-proof my own property, it more or less started with one slide. I can remember it quite clearly. I was listening to a well-known distinguished professor from UBC, and it was probably the first time that I'd heard about the impacts of climate change and how they were going to impact the region of the country that I was planning on standing up an operation. So he showed a slide with a big red dot right over top of southwestern Manitoba, and talked about how the evaporation or the evapotranspiration rates would probably almost double by 2025. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, wow, that's something we've got to be able to try to manage for or try to work against. So my farm goal has always been to maximize ecological performance, and drought proofing our operation has been a big part of that. Yeah, so I just want to say too that, you know, I'm not a soil scientist, but I firmly have caught the soil health bug. It's been about 5 years, so I've really paid attention to a lot of that topic, the discussion around it, and some of the presentations and things. And my work with the Watershed District too has also given me a really big opportunity to take in a lot of presentations like that. So coming out here, getting established as a Watershed District staff person, and then listening to folks like Dr. David Sachin and Dr. Danny Blair and friends of mine like Hank Venema and Robert Sanford, they've all kind of coined the same message, is that, you know, we could see in excess of 30 days that are going to be plus 30. And we probably came close to that last summer. That was a big boost to the motivation of how we're going to have to work to drought proof our farms, right? So that along the way has just kind of pushed me into where I want to speak to today. But I am not a soil scientist. I'm going to speak a lot about what I believe is to be true around soil health and stuff like that. But I think that paying attention to the soil is probably the biggest driver that we can really spend our effort on trying to drought proof and make our farms more resilient. So I want to throw this slide up. This is all the watershed districts in the province. And again, a lot of the programming I'm going to talk about today is kind of focused in our watershed district, but I know that a lot of my colleagues that work around the province have similar programs and whatnot. So I just, at this point, I was going to ask Karen maybe to help with the polls and see if you guys could just respond as to what watershed districts you live in if you're from Manitoba, or if there's an out of province option there too if you're from other parts of the country. But this will just give me a better opportunity to maybe speak in a little bit more in generalities around some of the programming, if that's the case, if there's not a lot of folks from my neck of the woods. I see a few the people on the panel are in the presentation. I recognize the names, but
all right, we've got 7 people who've answered. Any more? Do you know what your watershed district is? Hopefully you can find it on the map there.
we always joke that we're one of the best kept secrets in Manitoba, conservation districts, but
This might be a trick question on the poll. It's forcing us to answer one from the first question and one from the Esther's Edge. So don't, everybody's paying attention. They just can't answer it fairly.
Right. So only, okay, got it. Well, yeah, so someone was in Redboyne and also had to click Winnipeg to get over the second question. All right, so this is may or may not work. I think you had too many watershed districts for the number of answers that we had, so that could be the problem. All right, but a couple more numbers trickled in. So some people will answer in the chat as well. That's great. I would think, yeah, I think people are answering out of province for the first one if they're in the second group. So that's cool as well. And just have a lot of out of province and Winnipeggers in here. All right, so we've got 13 people and then some people putting in the chat. I'm gonna close the poll in a couple seconds. 2 more seconds to go. All right. And I will share the results.
Okay, so nobody in my hometown. That's great. We'll have to kind of change it up. It's not that the programming isn't available to you fellas, but I'll just kind of speak to it as I can. So yeah, I'm going to go through a list here. The program's available. I'll kind of go through it in categories. Working with natural features, wetlands specifically. We do a lot of water storage, water retention projects in our part of the world, so I could speak to some of those. And then focus more on the soil side of things, topsoil, sponge, erosion, gullies, riparian, and soil restoration. On the little fringes of land within your operations, I'll speak to some of the buffers and shelter belt programming that we can offer to help with enhancing the hydrological system, snow trap, and all those kinds of good things that shelter belts can provide. And then I'll come back around to soil health in the more of the upland context, the more of the field type applications of that kind of work. So starting with wetlands, I mean, these are the natural features on our landscapes that will hold water. They've been given to us, right? They're there already. So there's 3 different kind of areas we can work with wetlands. We can restore previously drained wetlands. We can conserve what we have, and we can work to enhance the water management around existing wetlands as well. So I'll start with restoration. This is a map of a property that we purchased in roughly 2003. It was poorly drained. It was a poor job of drainage. There was a lot of backhoe ditches and very dangerous kind of situations, actually. So we decided that we would take advantage of a current program. It was called the RIP program, I think, the Wetland Restoration Improvement Program in 2009. And I can't honestly say how much we were paid for this kind of a project. I think there's about 40 some acres here, and I almost want to say that it helped pay for one of the quarter sections. Now, back in 2003, these quarter sections were selling for $40,000 to $60,000. So it's quite a different scenario we're in today. But just a quick kind of canvassing of some of our partners that do offer these programs today. You know, you could be looking at anywhere between $15,000 to $2,000 up to $4,000 per acre to restore previously drained wetlands. And I know this is a super hard sell for restoring wetlands onto cultivated fields. A lot of people think that that's regressive and it's going backwards as far as land development goes. But in a perennial system like what we're operating, it's been a no-brainer. I honestly believe that we produce more forage, net usable forage, as a result of restoring these wetlands. So everything you see there, these little blue outlines, they represent the wetland. The black is the outlet ditch that was dug. So those have been all kind of filled in, and these wetlands are now somewhat intact again. And I'll just show you a couple of landscape pictures. So these arrows you see, the first arrow on the left, I've got a picture taken from the road looking east on that one wetland. And then the second picture I'll show you is the second wetland. It's a little further into that quarter section. It's got the arrow facing north. So I'll just show you what that looks like on the land. So here's a picture taken in the early spring. You can see a little bit of snow in the outlet channel that's been plugged there. And that water just sits in there. And then when the soils thaw out, the water infiltrates into the ground. It builds a little bit of subsurface moisture for the plants, or it'll evaporate away with wind and summer temperatures. The second shot again is the second wetland I wanted to show you. So this is a real heavy growth of timothy. Timothy was in the seeding mix that we put on this field, but was never to be this dense or solid. It's really just taken over this little microclimate wet basin. So I'm happy with the forage production in there, to tell you the truth. And that wire that you can see in the bottom of the picture is the second highest, like it's the second wire on a 2-strand fence. So it's probably in that 36 to 40 inch height range. So the cows love that, and I love that too. So I honestly think that this has been a win for us. It was actually studied a bit. So Manitoba Habitat Heritage partnered with us and the Water Security Agency of Saskatchewan to do some transects and try to monitor and figure out how much net biomass was being created. The project only carried on for a couple of years, so we didn't get conclusive data on it, but I think after the 10 plus 15 years that we've had this in these wetlands plugged, I'm quite happy with the extra, the biomass that's been produced there. So that's one project you can look at, wetland restoration. This is a second. This is moving more into the conservation of existing wetlands. So we've coined it the SWIP program. There's several of us watershed districts, mostly in the southwest part of the province, that offer this program currently. So this is recognizing farms and landowners that want to conserve class 1 and 2 wetlands. So those are your very seasonal, ephemeral wetlands that have water in them for, you know, most of May, and then they kind of dry up, or they'll show back up again in an intense summer rainfall event. These wetlands hold water on the landscape again, fill subsoil surface with water. So they're pretty important as far as the hydrological system goes. There's a lot of funding available for this program. Just a quick aside, the government of the day put $52 million to the Winnipeg Foundation. That money sits there and creates interest. The interest from that investment is then awarded or funded to this program specifically. So it's a 10-year program. You can sign up as a landowner and get a 10-year contract to get an annual payment for maintaining these wetlands on your property. Dollar values are in that 75% of cash rental rates, or roughly 3% of the assessed value of the farms. It is up to the watershed district really to how they approach that payment schedule and whatnot. But that's another one there for sure that is a useful way to kind of keep water on the landscape and be rewarded for it. Now, wetland enhancement can take several different forms. So when I'm talking about wetland enhancement, I'm thinking about the managing that sensitive transition area between the uplands and the aquatic environments that are often associated with wetlands. So here's a picture of a local farmer that's realizing that when you get too close to a wetland like that, it's often soft. There's maybe salinity issues. When you drag equipment through that soil and break down the connections that we learned about yesterday, all the soil health and the aggregates and the pore spaces, it can often lead to real deterioration in the agronomic possibilities in that area. You get white salt zones and all those kinds of things. You've probably all seen ruts and everything else. So we have moved into offering program funding to help producers kind of just put that ground into a little bit more of a viable system. You know, sowing a perennial down is probably the best option there. So we can recognize this with annual payments of you know, up to $25 per acre, as well as help with the establishment costs. And lots of guys look at doing this just to reduce overlap, kind of get rid of little narrow fingers as equipment has gotten bigger. Maybe isn't as feasible to get in and do tight little turns and all that kind of stuff, and you've got overlap and concentrations of seed and fertilizer and those kinds of things. And so it can often make a field more profitable to take a good look at this and maybe, you know, just square things up or put some of this land into perennial systems. Now I want to show you another picture of what we've kind of looked at before too. Is this takes wetland enhancement maybe to another level. So what you're looking at here is a woody biomass planting around the edge of a more of a class 3 or a 4 wetland, where your water is going to stay for a more permanent part of the summer season. You can see some cattail growth in this one. And so the concept here was to plant willow biomass rings around a wetland and help with both nutrient coming from the field. So these woody biomass buffers would act as a buffer to reduce nutrient from leaving the field and into the water, and also from kind of having salinity creep out. The deeper roots of the perennial woody material, the woody vegetation, is going to reduce the amount of salinity that's going to show up on the fringe of a wetland. Now, sadly, this project met its end in 2012, 2013, when the Shelter Belt Center at Indian Head was kind of defunded. But here's a shot of what was established there. This was probably 2010, 2011. The idea here was that we were going to grow these biomasses up, and with instrumentation, measure the movement of subsurface water in and out of the pothole, and then also utilize the willow as a biomass product for heating or for even biochar as a field amenity. I went out, and so these are still existing. They got planted, and then the research actually ended. But I went out and took a picture of it just last week. So there they are. Those willows are anywhere in that 15 to 20 foot range, and they make a really nice snow trap now. And I'm sure they're still providing some of the benefit to water management on the field, but they're just not being monitored or studied. Okay, so that's kind of leaving wetlands. We'll go into water retention. So again, like I said, Upper Assiniboine, we'd always been pretty active in water retention, building small dams and backfloods. That was a result of feedback from our local members when it came time to do an integrated watershed management plan. Surface water management was a big concern. So slowing down surface water to reduce the negative impacts to public property and private property through drainage and flooding. So we've done this now for probably 10 years, and we utilize funding from the federal Canadian Agricultural Partnership currently. We try to build 6 to 8 structures a year throughout the watershed. And this here is a picture I've stolen from the Cows and Fish publication. So Lauren Finch and Barry Adams, back 15 years ago, developed the Cows and Fish program in Alberta, and this was a publication it's just a good graphic that explains when we drain wetlands and we do drainage, the peak flows of our creeks and streams increase. We get a higher, faster flush of creek water, which usually causes the trouble, and that's kind of indicated by the little race car. And then what a better ecological system would look like is an old jalopy truck that's going to take a lot of curves and bends and slow right down, and the peak flows increase erosion and sediment carry and downstream and stuff like that. So what we're really trying to do with our small dam program is just reverse that trend. And obviously you get the benefits of on-farm water storage, which many guys are interested in, especially in years of dry. So here's a picture of a dam we built again just north of Minnesota, and our whole plan here is to try to force the creek through this tiny little 12-inch pipe. In the background, you can see the runway. That in times of high flow, that creek channel is going to fill right up, and then it'll slowly drain out through the pipe over a course of a couple of weeks. So we're reducing peak flows, we're trapping sediment behind our structure, and we're reducing stream channel erosion and water quality impacts downstream. And we're also trying to increase and drag out that base flow in the stream, which is probably on the whole better for the aquatic environment, right? So like I said, we've built a lot of these structures. We've probably got 60 or 70 of them across our watershed district, and we'll continue to build these because we feel that they have multiple benefits, both on farm and for the ecology of the hydrological system. And they're often always associated with a pipe. Not all of them, but most of them will have a drain pipe to just give us a little more control over the water. Yeah. We have the technical ability to assess these structures from the desk. We do typically go out and do a field survey, but I just wanted to show you some fancy pictures here of how we can we can design these things. We can kind of calculate the footprint, the storage, the contributing watershed, and that's what really drives our design and our construction processes. There's another picture, and there's just some of the benefits of the water retention programs that we offer. I think most watershed districts would offer this program too if you come to them. And maybe just mention too, like we even have like sophisticated hydrological models that developed by a company called Quanti. It's delivered to us through the Manitoba Forage and Grasslands Association, and it has the capacity or the capability to answer some pretty big overall watershed questions, like what would it do to a creek if we restored a bunch of wetlands, or if we increased the soil organic content by 1%, or if we built more storage into the system. That watershed model, a hydrological model, has the capability of answering some of those bigger kind of questions for us. So we rely on that as well as a tool to try to figure out where to store water, how much of a resource or how much energy and effort we put into those kinds of programs. So I'm going to leave kind of water retention and start to get back into buffers and tree plantings. I don't think I need to tell you guys all the benefits of working trees. They can do all kinds of things, from animal welfare to protecting young seedlings in crop fields and snow trap and management, stuff like that. But again, since the closure of the PFRA Shelter Belt Center, landowners have had to pay for the costs of tree seedlings. We've gone and sourced them kind of from different nurseries around, and they're roughly $1.50 a seedling. We still subsidize the planting of these trees, but it has been a big change. We've probably seen a 50% reduction in tree planting since the closure of the Shelter Belt Center and the trees becoming put on a cost to the producer. But I think there's opportunity coming down the pipe now that with the 2 billion tree program that's being rumored, and we're actually in the process of applying for that, we will once again be able to offer trees to producers for free. So you can see in these two pictures, these are both on my farm, that you can see the snow trap, especially in the one picture on the right where the fence posts a little bit there start to disappear. So that's a row of carragana and a row of spruce that I used to kind of cut off a paddock. This is another project that we worked with a producer on. So this producer was pretty adamant that rows of trees would help produce benefits to his fragile seedling crops. Corn, he had an experience where a massive wind event right at a very sensitive time during a corn crop, he felt had a real impact on the yield. So that was his experience, and we helped them put these lines of trees across the whole field. So this is close to a alley cropping project that we've done in the watershed. And he's gone on to do other fields. He's fully behind this idea. So the picture on the left is when we first planted this. There's about 3 or 4 shelter belt rows across a quarter section here. So it's a little bit more spread out, but still giving some benefit and snow trap and crop protection. This picture on the right was taken in 2016. So this belt is now much more impressive, I'm sure. I just don't have a more current picture of it. And then this photo is my home quarter. So you can kind of see in the upper right-hand corner, there's a bunch of rows of trees there. Those trees are spaced at about a 75-foot spacing. And then there's another couple rows down on the bottom left-hand corner. I received funding through Manitoba Agriculture. It was like an innovation grant to help pay for the cost of these trees. And it was really kind of around, I can increase the forage production on this by providing protection from the winds, as well as these shelter belts are all kind of a berry and shrub, berry producing shrubs that are really trying to drive at honeybee production. So I've kind of got two of those little benefits going with the trees on this project. But I'm still just waiting for the day that somebody phones me up and wants to do a more elaborate, aggressive kind of keyline approach to water management. I think with the GROW program available to us and an innovation category in that suite of money, I would really like to explore the option to do some of this work where you work with the contours of the landscape and really kind of funnel water into ponds and then spread it out. So you're just reusing the flow over and over, and you're trying to break the loss of water from just finding a low spot in a gully and running off the farm. Now, some of you will probably recognize this farm. It's a pretty iconic picture. It's from Mark Shepard's place in Wisconsin. So Mark has been to Manitoba a couple times to speak. He came to the University of Manitoba and presented back when we got together and did this in face-to-face. And then more recently, he spoke at the Manitoba Forage and Grasslands Regenerative Conference, I think 2 years ago. So Mark has kind of taken the agroforestry and the contour farming probably to the extent that nobody else has. And Mark makes a really solid argument that in his book, Restoration Agriculture, that he can produce more food calorie per acre than monocultures of crop or canola. And I'm sure that, again, looking at the system here, that this is going to provide for a much more resilient and healthy landscape as well. So again, to our shelter belt program, like as mentioned, we are more or less putting all the costs on the landowners right now, but I'm really hopeful that with the 2 billion tree program that's kind of coming down the pipe, that we'll once again be able to offer these services at a cost share or incentive that makes it more interesting and exciting for producers to plant shelter belts. I really, like, again, Scott had mentioned, I'm kind of a big agroforestry fan, so I think there's a place for trees on the farm, and the very small amount of acreage footprint that is taken up by trees is the benefits far outweigh the costs, as far as I'm concerned. So I'll go into kind of soil health, but focusing more on the narrow areas of gullies and grass and runways where you get acute concentrations of water flow and that washes soils away. We really have to watch those. I think it should be a continual farm goal for everybody to minimize wind and water erosion. Losing soil to wind and water erosion is really it's something that should be avoided and can be avoided. Obviously, we know how to do this kind of stuff. It was detailed in soil conservation textbooks from the 1960s. And so these kinds of practices we will fund at minimum 50-50. And if there's public benefit, then the cost shares can go up from there. This picture, I'm proud of it. It's a project site that we worked with the landowner from 15-16 years ago. It's up in the Birdtail Valley, and I've actually gone back. This is a picture from maybe 4 or 5 years ago, but this picture is from like 2005, and you can see that shale trap in the background behind those 3 kids there, the rock. So those kids actually planted the trees that you see in this runway, and we've been able to remedy this site or mediate this site to an extent. Like, this is a picture at the top of the gully, so you can see that lady. She's a teacher that was on the site. Like, that gully is 12-15 feet deep, and today that gully is quite it's just a ditch. You'd hardly notice walking through it. You'd easily be able to drive a snowmobile through it at this point of the year. So we've put hundreds of tons of soil back into that system over the years, just with the shale traps, trying to hold the soil material on the farm. Because you lose that, it's a big loss, right? You're losing soil. So and then going more into the riparian benefits, like, so not so much gullies and cuts, but we do a lot of programming with producers to protect riparian areas, and mostly from livestock. So it's setbacks, water systems, riparian fencing, but vegetation helps bind the soil, right? It increases infiltration. It increases the water's ability to get into the soil profile and be there for times of when you need it. So we will reward producers with annual payments for protecting riparian areas, setting aside vulnerable sites, and improving the water quality. And I love this picture. I took this picture last summer. It just speaks to what a riparian area can do for a farm. So if there was ever a good, when you say a picture's worth 1,000 words, like, I think that really rings true with this one. this is two different landowners with two different land management philosophies, and you can kind of just look at it and see that one's keeping the soil on farm and one is exporting it downstream and causing all kinds of trouble. This is upstream of Minnedosa Lake, so I mean, we know that there's water quality issues in the lake, and this isn't helping. And you can actually see in this photo that the head cutting is slowly coming into the riparian zone of the upstream landowner there. But I think with that vegetation in place, it's got a much harder time at eroding. So yeah, so vegetation connects the above and below ground water systems. We have to realize that, and where we're in sensitive, water sensitive areas, the vegetation is there to protect the ecological function of the site. And when it's removed, things unravel pretty quickly and can be a long time getting them back into place. So just lastly, like the upland management stuff, we are funding nowadays like the experimentation with cover crops, growing annuals, the 5 or 6 soil health principles that were talked about yesterday. We want to see guys experiment with plantings to try to improve the carbon content of the soil, the resilience of those soils. So anything that we can do with soil armor, increasing the length of the growing season with green plants, increasing diversity, be it through crop rotations or even just within the year, multi-species cocktails, cover crops. We want to reduce that disturbance of soil, chemical, mechanical, and integration of livestock is a big bonus as well, right? We'll even entertain the conversion to perennial in the term of like a 3 to 5 year sow down. So that's kind of working on the cropping side. There's also the opportunity now to recognize and reward grazing practices that are going to do the same, increase the content of carbon. We listened to Dr. Bork yesterday, a great presentation. I was all excited about that. That's really what I do at home. So I was all about listening to that. I loved it. So I think it is an opportunity to maybe address climate change in certain ways. And so payments tied to the rest and stocking density ratios is what we're trying to drive at. We can still drive around the landscape and see pictures like this. So again, we're losing topsoil to wind erosion. So you can address that with growing a cover crop to try to keep vegetation on the surface, or you can plant your shelter belts and try to reduce the wind speeds on the surface of the soil, right? Both practices can increase the productivity and make fields more resistant in the face of harsh weather. So there's a couple of pictures. This is a friend of mine from just outside of Elkhorn, Darren Johnson. They've been long time zero tillers. His father was on the Mandak board. And so they're well adversed at growing cover crops. They use it for grazing bison, and just a beautiful stand of multi-species cover crop there. And then this was a tour we went on last summer, one of the only in-person tours we were able to get onto. So this is just north of Rapid City. And again, a cover crop that we helped fund this cover crop. And again, its plan was to be grazed. So being able to bring livestock onto soil and grow these crops, get all the benefits of the exudates growing, being deposited into the soil through the growing season, and then converting some of that to cash with grazing fees or grazing revenues is a win-win. And then a lot of these crops will regrow, so you're maximizing the system, the growing season again. So there's all kinds of benefits to this, and the funding for these programs, I think, are just going to continue to increase. Somebody did mention the On-Farm Climate Action Fund program. It's a big federal program that's supposed to be coming. I don't want to speak too much to it, but we're really excited about the opportunity to help producers experiment and play with the opportunities to do some of these covers and see what kind of benefits they can get from them. And now I'm going to kind of pivot away from the cropping side and talk about the grazing side. So I think we've all probably seen this image of roots and how they can respond to the grazing pressure. And we've probably all sadly seen a grazed pasture like the one in the background too. So I think I know full well that we do have the ability to remove carbon from soils like this. You don't have to cultivate soils to remove carbon. I think when fields are kept in this condition, they can lose carbon. So that's not what we want to do. We want to do it the other way. We want to grow it to produce and store more carbon, as it was alluded to yesterday. And we can really damage sites with livestock too. So this is probably a big slough that maybe should have been fenced and managed a little more cautiously, because once this soil is compacted and destroyed to the extent that this is, it'll be a long time recovering if we don't go in there and do some pretty serious mechanical intervention. So I've been grazing cattle for about 20 years now. I've kind of drank the Kool-Aid. I'm all into the AMP grazing thing. So here's a shot of keeping cattle very tight and moving them across a stone crossing on our farm. And I run big groups and I try to do long rest periods. I prefer to go multiple moves a day if I can get away with it. It's a pretty taxing program on your time, and especially with a young family and a full-time job, I can't always do it, but I do see the benefits. I believe they're there to keep these cattle in a pretty tight formation and get a uniform disturbance on the pasture, and then a long rest recovery period seems to really keep that grass in a pretty healthy stand. I've got a lot of alfalfa stands that are 20 years old, and most people wouldn't believe me that they're 20 years old, and I've just done that through rest and rotation, keeping them tight and trying to move them over the course of the day, especially during the height of the sun when the sugar levels and grasses are the highest. That's why I try to keep our feed quality as high as possible, and daily gains, maximize the daily gains. There's another shelter belt in the foreground where I've tried to separate paddocks and put in tree shelter belts wherever possible, just to increase the benefit of the trees. And you need portable structures for this kind of grazing. You need to be able to move water troughs around and give them tight paddocks and pastures and stuff like that. So it is labor intensive, but I think the rewards are there. I can still remember my grandpa used to get so mad the first few years we tried this kind of stuff, and he thought I was wasting grass, and it was like, no, you're putting that resource back in the bank, and you're building that layer of protection on the soil, the armor. And I've seen in the last couple of days the pictures of temperatures taken of bare soil and of soil that's been covered with plant material, and just thinking even back to the watershed conference in December, it was spoke of how with our warming temperatures, there is this chance that, well, it's not a chance, it's a reality that the soils are going to respire more carbon in higher temperatures. And so this layer of armor and kind of like thermal protection becomes even more important, even though it is pretty hard to some guys to swallow the fact that you're leaving forage out there that could be converted to pounds of gain or to days of grazing revenue. So it is a bit of a balancing act. You've got to kind of look at it like Gabe Brown says, you're in it for long-term profitability, you're not in it for short-term annual profit. So there's just a shot of what I kind of try to do on one of our pastures. This is the same one that I showed earlier where we've plugged the wetlands, but up to 3 moves a day and giving them just enough grass to be happy, and that seems to be working for me. You can see at the bottom there is some paddocks where those are the weekenders where you can actually get away and not spend every day at the farm. I've also started to try and stockpile grass, so there's more biomass, and then you come in there with a high stock density and try to really build up the layer of armor on the soil. But this stuff all takes time and energy, and so that's where with some of the programming we're going to try to recognize the increased effort required to potentially store more carbon in the soil. This site here is actually involved in a Brandon University study where they're taking soil cores to 1 meter depth, as was talked about yesterday. And we're just going to try to figure out, you know, the impacts of the carbon levels in the deeper layers of the soil from some of the different practices we can have. So I said it all takes time, but I've got a good crew of staff here that love to come out and experiment and play. And so it just fits with my operation. It's what I can do in my perennial system to try to build that soil resilience and be prepared for the next big stressor that comes along, be it really dry conditions or be it a 6-8 inch rain like we had experienced back in that 2014 rain event. So just in closing, I think I want to say that these are practices that we can't throw money at and buy our way out of the problem. Impaired soil health, there's no silver bullet for this either. There's no generic recipe. I think a lot of people that want to get involved in cover crops are looking for a recipe. And it really is about trying to decide what your farm goal is and how you're going to approach it with the tools and the capacity that you have. So it's got to be a good combination of awareness and interest in the topic and a desire to learn and implement what you can on your own farm and ranch. I think that creating a good goal statement and writing it down is key to help you stay focused and identify your current resource concerns. It's quite easy to kind of get sucked down rabbit holes and look at the new opportunities that kind of come along, but having that goal to refer to year in and year out as it will change with your progress is a good way to kind of keep focused. The nice thing is that the supports for these projects are here and they're growing. I mentioned one, but there are several programs that are coming up available to us to help producers mitigate some of the risk, the financial risk with experimentation. I think that's what it's going to take. So these practices are much more complex in nature than what modern agriculture is kind of where it has led us in the past. So you start throwing in various crops and then you have herbicide issues and maybe not so much for organic producers, but it does become a much more complex system to manage. So again, with that, I hope I've given you a bit of insight into some of the programs that are available to try to build farm resilience. And with that, I'll just kind of leave it and see if there's any questions.
Right on. I think we're gonna hold off on questions. We're right at time, so that's perfect. Thanks very much, Ryan, and a couple of comments in the chat there. People are liking what they're hearing, and yeah, lots of really good information. And I think we can expand on some of that and get to some questions here in the panel this afternoon.